in today's lesson, we're going to be talking about how the Eagles use arpeggios to create one of the freaking coolest and most famous sequences from a solo that's ever been written. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. The chord progression is going to be B minor to F sharp dominant 7 to A to E dominant 7 to G to D major to E minor and back to F sharp 7 once again. So this is a really, really cool chord progression, first of all, and I think that is a huge part of the reason why the actual sequence of arpeggios sounds so cool. It's because, well, it's written over a cool chord progression, okay? So if it's written over a boring chord progression, well, you're going to be a little bit more limited. But if we have a cool chord progression to begin with on our song, well, then we're going to be able to write some cooler stuff over it. So it matters to begin with what the actual chord progression sounds like, okay? If you actually analyze this chord progression, I would analyze it kind of in a manner like this, which is breaking it up into these sections of 2 measures like this, okay? So if I just took B minor and F sharp 7, to me, that would be like a minor 1 chord, and then actually that F sharp 7, it would be the 5 of B minor. If I play B minor and then I play F sharp 7, that F sharp 7 actually really wants to just go back to B minor, okay? Instead of going back to B minor, this F sharp 7 just goes to A. So it almost, like on paper, it doesn't really follow the rules, so to speak, of where that F sharp 7 is supposed to go. Actually, if you just looked at it in a vacuum, it'd be kind of weird. But basically, it's just doing almost the same progression now on these next 2 bars that it was doing back here, except it's major. So now we have A and E7. So to me, this section here on the right, the A and the E7, would be in the key of A, and then the section here on the left between the B minor and F sharp 7 would be in the key of B minor. So this part, the A and the E7, that is 1 and 5 in the key of A. And then, of course, the same type of thing happens. E7, if I was playing that, should just go back to A, but it doesn't. It actually goes to G. And again, the exact same thing kind of here. It's like a 1 chord and a 5 chord in the key of G, okay? Now also, just to really quickly finish this up, D major and B minor are relative majors and minors of each other. So if you're improvising over this chord progression, you might think, oh, this is kind of like 4 going to 1 in the key of D. That definitely is an argument that can be made as well. And then finally, you just have this E minor chord, which if we're thinking now back in the key of B minor, that would be like the 4 chord, and then F sharp 7 is the 5 chord. And that's the only time actually that F sharp 7 goes back to B minor. So that F sharp 7, like I was saying before, it's kind of designed to pull us to B minor. So that's the only time in the chord progression that those dominant chords really like kind of follow the rules. Okay, so now that we've gotten a basic understanding of the chord progression, let's go ahead and actually take a look at the arpeggios that are being played. In this first arpeggio is going to be over the B minor chord. And what do you know it? We're just playing a B minor arpeggio, a B minor triad. Wow, that's astounding. And, you're going to start to notice like how perfect this whole entire thing is really written and how perfectly it fits in the chords. So you just play that several times. Da 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 da. And it isn't even a complicated rhythm. It's just eighth notes. It's eighth notes in groups of threes, which does kind of make it sound a little bit more interesting. But it's not a complicated rhythm, and it's not even, a complicated order. It's literally just playing the arpeggio, starting from the top note and going downward. So, theoretically, if they wanted to, could have made it like this. Could have started from the bottom note. That's probably what most people would have done. But they started from the top note. So you have this B minor arpeggio, and this is going to go actually to the next arpeggio is going to look like this. So what the heck is this arpeggio? So first of all, as soon as the chord changes to F sharp 7 underneath, we're going to go to this arpeggio. And then finally, you hear that slide up to this note, which is actually part of the same arpeggio. So that note that you slide up to later is this A sharp note all the way over here. So what is this arpeggio? Because I don't see an F sharp in there. So how does this kind of fit over the F sharp 7 chord? Well, guess what, guys? An F sharp 7 chord has the notes F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, and E in it, okay? So actually what's happening here is he's taking simply the 3rd, 5th, and flat 7 of that F sharp 7 chord and playing that as the arpeggio over the chord. So you don't need to play the root, especially when you're dealing with a 7th chord. A lot of times it sounds really cool if you just play an arpeggio with the 3rd, 5th, and 7th in it. Now, if we listen to that in a vacuum, actually, this arpeggio, if we forgot about the fact that it's over an F sharp 7 chord, this is actually an A sharp diminished arpeggio. So you see there, it's really a diminished arpeggio, diminished triad, by the way. But when it's played over F sharp 7, it just sounds like part of the chord because it literally is. It's the 3rd, 5th, and 7th of the chord. And then they just slide all the way up here. It sounds so cool. Up to another A sharp, which is the 3rd of the chord again. So all of that stuff there fits over the chord perfectly and is literally just part of the arpeggio. So we had this B minor. And then the F sharp 7, the 3rd, 5th, and 7th of that arpeggio, also known as basically just a diminished triad. So that's one thing. Just remember that if you've never noticed that before, the 3rd, 5th, and 7th of a dominant chord, if you remove the root, it's actually just a diminished triad. Very, very interesting. So now, after all that, let's delete that higher note there. Something really, really cool happens that I've talked about many, many times before, and that is this concept of voice leading, okay? So this A sharp diminished arpeggio, we're gonna have to go play over this A chord here. So the notes in an A major chord, just an A major triad, would actually be A, C sharp, and E. Well, guess what? 2 of those notes are already there in this arpeggio. So actually, the most technically perfectly efficient way to move to that A chord, which is actually what they do, is simply move this A sharp down a half step to A. So now they're playing this. So you went. voice leading. Voice leading is when we move from one chord to the next chord, but we find what is the absolute least amount of movement that I can make to get to that next chord. If it's only a half step, great. Or even better, if I can keep some notes the same. So 2/3 of this arpeggio is literally the same thing as what we were playing before, okay? So now, after that, guess what? We're going to go to the E7 chord here, and we're going to use the exact same concept that we used over the F-sharp 7 chord before. It's just going to be transposed down a whole step, actually. So if we listed out all the notes in an E7 chord, we'd have E, G sharp, B, and D. So if you remember before, they used the 3rd, 5th, and the 7th. Well, guess what? We're going to do that same thing again. And by the way, I didn't mention this before, but this is the perfect voice leading to get to that arpeggio. So A goes down a half step to G sharp, C sharp goes down a whole step to B, and then actually this E moves down a whole step to D. So you have this. And then you're going to move all the way up. Guess what? Remember we slid up to the 3rd on the F-sharp 7 chord? Yeah, that's what we're going to do again. We're going to slide up to the 3rd, another G sharp there. So, you know, as you're watching this, if you're one of these theory haters or whatever, you know, just feel it and use your ear and all this stuff, which is, by the way, using your ear is super important. I'm not saying not to do that, but do you really think that they just came up with this accidentally? You think that Joe Walsh came up with this just randomly guessing around at putting his fingers and random frets on the guitar until he found something that sounded good? I feel like he probably knows a little something about, triads or chords. I could be wrong. But anyway, it's just amazing how this just perfectly fits over the whole entire chord progression. So far we had the B minor arpeggio, and then we had the F-sharp 7 arpeggio, which was just the 3rd, 5th, and 7th. And then we had the A major arpeggio. And then the same thing as the F-sharp 7, but we did in the E7, G sharp, B, and D. And then, guess what? We're going to keep following the exact same pattern that we established. So we're on this E7 chord. Well, let's go now to G and see what happens on that G chord. The notes in a G chord are G, B, and D, and just a G major triad. Well, guess what? There's a B there, and there's a D there already. So we just moved this G sharp down a half step to G, and bing, bang, boom. And now we're going to actually start to change the pattern just a little bit here, okay? But that is another exactly the same shape as we were playing with the A major chord, but now it's in a G major, perfectly voice-led. It's incredible. It's just such a perfectly put together sequence of arpeggios. So we had, and then we go down to, and then we're gonna go to the D major chord. Now, this is the only time now we're finally going to break the pattern a little bit here, okay? It's not going to be absolutely perfectly voice-led. And that's okay, by the way. Voice leading is something I talk about all the time. Does that mean you always have to perfectly voice lead everything? No. Actually, once you practice the heck out of your voice leading left and right and you learn how to voice lead over chord progressions, then you're like, well, now that's starting to get boring because I'm voice leading everything perfectly. So you want to break that pattern every once in a while. It's okay and it's a good thing to do. So we're going to move to the D chord, and actually you can play this D chord. I like to play it in different places. So I actually like to play this D major arpeggio over here. So I like to switch string sets to here. And if you notice, by the way, this is oriented in a similar way to the G major chord. So it's still root position, root, 3rd, 5th, But now it's just over a set of strings. So this is a good way to see how, like, oh, this is also a major triad, but it has a slightly different shape when we're on a different set of strings on the guitar due to the differences in the intervals tuned between the strings on the guitar, particularly between the third and the second string. So after we play that D major triad, we are going to slide up to a note. And can you just guess what chord tone it is that we're going to slide up to? Remember, we slid up to the third on the F sharp 7 chord. We slid up to the third on the E7 chord. And, yeah, we actually slide up to the third on the D major chord. Wow. What a coincidence. It's just, it's just the same like pattern over and over. It's pretty cool. So with that being said, we're going to go to this E minor chord here. And, well, what do you know? What do you think we're going to play in the E minor chord? You think we're just going to pick random notes or something? Yeah, we're going to play the E minor arpeggio. That's correct. So the notes in an E minor triad are E, G, and B. So guess what? We're going to play E, G, and B. We're going to play. Now, I will say with this, it depends on how you want to phrase it. So you could play this B over here instead. And that allows you to get this pull off between the B and the G. It sounds like kind of that's the phrasing they're doing. It's a little bit tougher on the fretting hand. I don't want to say left hand because maybe if you're left-handed, then your fretting hand's the right hand. But I like to just play it like this. No one's really going to notice if you don't phrase it absolutely identically. So there's a trade-off there. This is a little bit harder to pick because now every single note is on a different string. If I put this B over here, again, this is why you got to know the notes in the fretboard because it helps you make decisions like this too. Oh, I don't like that fingering as much. So let me put that note somewhere else, right? You could also, one other option, let me just show you guys really quick because you could play it like this. This is a little bit easier. It's actually the same way as playing it over here, but we can just play it over here. A little bit of a different timbre to it because these are two thinner strings. It sounds a little bit different to play the same arpeggio on the third and second strings as it does to play the same arpeggio on the first and second strings. Okay, so we're gonna play that E minor arpeggio literally just straight up. And then once we get to the F sharp 7 chord, okay, we're basically at the end now. We're going to do just slightly different than what we did in the F sharp 7 chord before. So if you remember, I told you we were playing the 7th, the 5th, and the 3rd on the F sharp 7 chord. Well, guess what? Now we're just going to play an F sharp major triad, actually. So of course, on any dominant chord, you can just play a major triad. You don't have to play the 7th on a dominant chord. I mean, you should be able to, but you don't have to because a major dominant chord is a major triad that has a flat 7 on it, okay? So actually, what ends up happening is you play the E minor, so we're not going to play the E this time, but we're going to slide up to that same F sharp that we slid up to before when we were actually on the D major chord. So remember, we were in a D major chord. We played the D major triad. So this is a very cool thing. It's kind of like voice leading, actually, where, hey, we can slide up to that same note. That F sharp is the third of the D major chord, but F sharp is the root of the F sharp 7 chord. So then when we get to the F sharp 7 chord at the end, we play that. And then, of course, we're at the end now. But if you remember, the first arpeggio we played was just a B minor arpeggio. So that kind of sets us up perfectly when we did this to now restart the whole sequence again. Because the first note of the B minor arpeggio all the way in the beginning is F sharp. So it's so cool, like, to be able to identify, oh, this one note, F sharp, that's the 5th of the B minor chord. Oh, that's the 3rd of the D chord. Oh, that's the root of the F sharp 7 chord. So that's one thing I'm also looking for whenever I'm working on soloing in a progression is, hey, are there any notes that are chord tones in multiple chords in the chord progression that I can just keep targeting that same note over and over and over again? Let's just recap really fast. So we had B minor, and then we had the 3rd, 5th, and the 7th of the F sharp 7 chord here, and we slid up to the 3rd of the F sharp 7 chord. Then we're going to the A major chord in the 3rd bar. So all we do is just drop this A sharp down a half step, and bing, bang, boom, we've got an A major triad. Now we're going to do the same thing on the E7 chord. We're going to play the 3rd, 5th, and 7th of that E7 chord, and then we're going to slide up to the 3rd again on the 1st string. So, and then finally, we're going to get to the 2nd half of it. So we're going to voice lead again to the G major chord there in the 5th bar, just by lowering this G sharp down a half step. And then finally, we're going to break the pattern a little bit. We're going to go down to this D major, just regular triad. And then we're going to slide up to the 3rd of that D major chord. That is actually in common, by the way, is that even though the initial little triad that we're playing here is different than it was on the F sharp 7 and the E7 chord, we still slide up to the 3rd. You always end up sliding up to the 3rd on each of those chords. By the way, out of all the chord tones, the 3rd is one of the most important ones, and it's absolutely no coincidence that they keep sliding up to the 3rd and really emphasizing that note. So you got that D major chord, and then slide up to this F sharp all the way up there. And then we're going to go to E minor, just an E minor triad. Let's go ahead and just put it right here. This E minor triad. And then F sharp major triad over the F sharp 7 chord. And then we're going to slide up to that exact same F sharp again that we slid up to on the D major chord. So if you want to learn how to master the guitar fretboard so you can learn all the arpeggios that you need to know in every key all over the guitar fretboard so that you can craft solos just like this, then make sure you head on over to Jamsville.com right now and join the Jamsville GPS Fretboard Fundamentals course. Also, make sure you head on over to the Jamsville merch store. Pick up a Jamsville t-shirt just like this one. They fit great, they look great, they're super duper comfortable, and I love wearing them everywhere and representing the Jamsville community. Also, make sure you check out my new song. It's called My Divine. It's available on Spotify or your favorite streaming service. Click the link in the description below. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and until next time, listen, learn, and jam.